Hey, what's up, you guys? So today we're going to be reading creepy Reddit Let's Not Meet stories. I have my cranberry bubbly here. It's my drink of choice for the video. Shall we? Alright, so our first story is called The Creepy Dude Next Door, and it's written by Cascada Katana. One night, I got a knock at my door. I lived in a small studio apartment by myself at the time and barely knew anyone in the whole apartment unit, including my only neighbor. I lived next to a corner unit and had a hallway on the other side, so his unit was the only one sharing a wall with mine. I opened the door, and it was my landlord, who promptly asked me if I had been hearing loud noises next door. It was a noise complaint. No, I barely hear them at all. I stepped outside into the hallway and saw him for the first time. A short, stocky guy with a few prominent warts wearing a hoodie. The apartment building was mostly low-rent housing, and I had no reason to distrust the guy after living next to him and barely hearing a peep for a year plus, so I vouched for him because I didn't like seeing landlords use complaints as an excuse to kick people out. Big mistake. I go back inside after telling the guy to knock on my door again if it ever happens so I can help out. I go back to what I was doing. Another knock on my door. This time, it's the neighbor. He says, "I'm just feeling rattled. Could I ask you to come over? I can make tea." I politely declined, saying I was in the middle of something. 30 minutes later, another knock. "I have some games if you want to play those. We could smoke and hang out. Please, I just need someone," he pleaded. And again, said no. And yet another knock. And finally, he wore down my patience. "Fine, I'll come over for a little bit, but I'm bringing my own drink." I grabbed my pepper spray and stuffed it into my back pocket, just in case. His room was dimly lit and full of large surrealist paintings that depicted people in twisted positions. He had tons of keepsakes, everything from dolls to woodcut idols nailed up to the walls. He clearly didn't get a lot of visitors. He starts brewing some tea, asks again if I want some. I politely decline. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I notice it. A ball-peen hammer sitting directly next to the tea kettle. I eyed that thing like a hawk, making sure his hand never strayed from the kettle. I'm a shut-in kind of girl, so I'm not exactly strong or anything, and he could have easily overpowered me. I try to put it out of my mind, but the atmosphere keeps sending me into fight or flight. Something about this guy was wrong, and my brain was yelling at me to leave. But for some reason, I stayed. He and I started talking about art, and he seemed oddly fixated on the concepts of masculine as dominant and the feminine as the artistic, supplicative self. I'm an illustrator and not super familiar with high art, so I try to make normal conversation about his paintings and his job, but it kept steering back to his fascination with gender dysmorphia. Then he says, "Want to see something I'm working on?" A chill runs up my spine. For some reason, I say, "Sure." He then boots up his desktop and shows me what he calls a machine. It's a video. Shot in and around the city. It contained the occasional shots of random subway walls and buildings, old machinery, then it starts showing random people from off the street. It was shot from a phone camera, and the angle suggested that those nearby weren't aware he was filming them. And I recognized all the locations, all places relatively nearby. This continued for 10 minutes until I had finally had enough. I said, "Sorry, man, I really gotta get back. My friends are waiting on me." "Oh, but the tea isn't done yet." He walks over to the tea kettle again. The hammer is still right there on the stove next to his hand. I start walking to the door. It's at this point that my brain is telling me to get out, even though nothing was especially a giant red flag so far. Just an eccentric painter guy with some weird hobbies who really wanted me to stay over. Thankfully, I managed to make my escape. Mind you, this man is my neighbor, and has been the entire time I've lived here. I call up a nearby friend and ask to stay the night, but it didn't matter. This is where I lived. He knew exactly where I lived and that I lived alone. The next morning, I returned my place. I felt awful. I barely slept that night prior, so I decided to take a shower. And that's when I saw it. A small hole in the tile wall just big enough to see through. This bathroom shared the same wall with it. How long had that been there? I looked through it, and clear as day, I could see back into that dingy apartment. I promptly covered it. I had never heard from him again, no knocks or anything. 2 months later, I decided to move. The landlord's brother, who was filling in for him for a week while I was moving out, asked me why I was moving. I had mentioned I had a bad experience with someone in the building, and I didn't want to rat him out or anything, but the brother already knew who it was. Oh, him? Don't worry about him. He's harmless. How did the landlord's brother, who had barely even operated in the building before, know about my neighbor? Had someone else had similar experiences with him? Was this common enough that even he was aware? I couldn't stop thinking about the hole in the shower, the hammer, the dolls nailed up on the walls, his machine. And why was this guy so sure about him being harmless? I want to believe he was just some eccentric artist with strange fascinations, but that old gnawing feeling just won't go away. Either way, let's not meet again. I definitely feel like the artist is someone who's into like some... There's a difference between doing something for art and doing it because it's crazy. You could have just had a hammer out because you were fixing something, but like it's weird that you just kept it out because it probably means you're gonna use it for something. It may not be used with the best intentions, you know? Alright, now time for our next story. Our next story is from Captain Bunny, and it's called Shirtless Guy Sprinting Towards Me in the Dark. This is my other encounter I had on my walk home from my college course. This took place in autumn, about a month or so after my first encounter, which I talked about in my other post. After the first instance with the guy driving slowly towards me, I bought a small thing of handheld pepper spray that I held onto when I walked home. My college course was every Wednesday, and I would always take the same route home. I didn't have a car or bike, so I would just walk home. It was starting to get closer to winter, which meant I would have to leave class early in order to walk home while it was still light out. Since it got darker and darker earlier, I actually purchased an emergency flashlight at the gas station in town. This instance, however, my professor got caught up in a lecture that was 20 minutes longer than expected, around 6:50 p.m. By the time I set off on my walk home, it was already dark. My path consisted of walking up a walkway on a hill, still in town. There were several roads that connected the main road at the top. At the top of these hills were a couple of houses and housing complexes with streetlights more sparse than at the bottom of the hill. I had walked up the hill, turned left, and continued fast walking forward. Up ahead there was a crosswalk with a street lamp on the other side. At this point I was already on high alert due to having to walk home in the dark, so I had my pepper spray clutched in my hand, and I was at the start of the crosswalk when I heard a sound behind me, like a tapping sound. So I glanced behind me and see the noise. A shirtless man who looked to be in his mid-20s was in a full-on dead sprint towards me. Not a normal jog, a full-on sprint. I don't know how, but after I was almost instantly on the other side of the crosswalk facing him, holding my pepper spray outstretched under my sleeve. He slowed down and stopped at the crosswalk. I flipped up my sleeve to show the pepper spray and shine my flashlight on him, and we stood there staring at each other for maybe half a minute on either end of the crosswalk, neither of us speaking a word. Eventually, he turned around and started jogging casually down the path before turning off down the hill at the path I had walked up earlier. Up until that point, I had been checking behind me frequently and around me and didn't see or hear anyone. Only until I heard those footsteps and looked behind me did I see him. The rest of the walk home, I half ran, half fast walked until I was in my driveway. I think of the possibility that he might have been a jogger, but there were things around him that were off. Firstly, he was shirtless in cold weather. I was wearing a sweater, and even after running home, I was freezing. Second, he had no water, no light, or reflective gear. After a few feet from the lamppost, it was nearly pitch black. Either way, I told my professor what happened next time I saw her in class, and she offered me rides home if the lectures were past dark. Maybe it was a jogger or someone with ill intentions, but I hope I never meet them again. Yeah, I hope you never meet him again either. That's really weird, especially because anybody who would be jogging in winter would have some sort of like, I don't know, they make winter running gear, right? Nobody likes to jog in the cold weather in the winter. Maybe he was on drugs or something, because like, why would you intentionally go out without a shirt on unless like, I don't know, maybe that was an element of spectacle or an element of surprise, but like, that's scary. Alright, on to our next story. Our next story is by somebody called Blackberry Biscuit and is called, Ah Yes, I'd Love to Use That Collar on You. This is a story about a man named John that I met while working retail. John is an older white man in his mid-50s, well-dressed, well-spoken, shoulder-length steel gray hair, and a low ponytail tied back. At the time, I was working at a farm and a pet supply store. I was called over to help a customer look at electric fences and shock collars for dogs, which I am steadfastly against, but I had to help the customer. I asked him what I could help him with, and he said he was interested in an electric fence for his dogs, since he had a cabin in the woods and he wanted to make sure they didn't get away. He said, "Oh yes, I'm looking to use this shock collar. Maybe on you?" Thoroughly creeped out, I tried to laugh it off and tell him, "No thank you." I finally got him someone who knew more than I did and thought it would be the end of it. Of course it wasn't. The next time he saw me, he said, "I have been looking for you. I bought what I wanted. I didn't know what you said. I wanted to slap you the next time I saw you." I told him if he ever hit me, I'd absolutely hit him back. So then, a few days later, he told me he would really, really like to take me out to lunch one day. I politely declined. He would come into the store and look for me. One day I saw him first. I hid until I thought he'd left, but no, he found me back in my department. He said, "Just so you know, I'm not dressed up for you today. I have a meeting with the bank, but if I didn't, I'd be taking you out for lunch. You know, I can tell you dyed your hair. You look so beautiful, but that doesn't mean anything to you, does it? It might mean something if you liked me back." He was never banned from the store, even after one of my managers heard him say these things to me, but my coworkers would tell me when he was in the store and help me get away from him until he left. I haven't seen him since I quit, and I am so thankful. What? Okay, firstly, he should have been banned from the store. That's creepy. That's harassment. And one of the comments below says, "Collars, cabin in the woods, suggestions of slapping, stupid unsolicited chat up lines." Says that he's like a toxic dominant, and he's one of the people that gives BDSM a bad name. The fact that he lives in a cabin in the middle of the woods and was trying to get a shock collar, but not for his dogs, was talking about hitting you. Yeah, that's definitely a recipe for something bad to happen. I'm so sorry this person had to go through this, Blackberry Biscuit. I hope you're okay now. Alright everybody, thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe for more stories like this. Bye!